Industry has turned into big business for the federal government. Your taxpayer dollars are going to subsidize podcasts you may have never even heard of. So which podcasts are you paying for and why? Well, founder and CEO of OpenTheBooks.com, Adam Mangievsky, joining us this morning with more on his investigation. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Jan.
This is pretty alarming, Adam. We are talking hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. What is the top line number and how much did the Fed spend on podcasting since 2020?
Well, there's a lot of taxpayer money chasing a lot of podcasts. We found since 2020, over the course of the last 3 years, $324 million worth of federal podcasts contain at least a $324 million worth of federal projects contain at least a podcast component. I want to give you a couple examples. For instance, $4 million flowed into the city of Wichita, Kansas, on a project to deliver a socially responsible COVID-19 message and health literacy, and they did that in part by partnering with local podcasters. You had $2.3 million flow into the University of Houston on a project to actually create and develop a podcast designed to stop the spread of HIV. So there's a lot of money. It's big business, a lot of taxpayer money in play.
And not only did you find podcasts being funded in America, but I found it astonishing. You also found podcasts in foreign countries funded by our government. What are some of those examples?
So $100,000 funded podcast training to develop podcasters in Brazil. You had $70,000 funded training and development of podcasters in Yemen. You had training of podcasters, for instance, in Bulgaria, even in Zimbabwe. Jan, we found, here's an example of a podcast. We found that there was a podcast done in Zimbabwe on the trans and intersex lives of people living in Zimbabwe.
And I'm trying to understand, what federal agencies are funding these podcasts and what are they saying the public purpose is? How can they justify this?
So there's a lot of federal agencies funding it. We found even like the Department of Agriculture or the Department of State, the National Endowment of the Arts, the National Science Foundation funding podcasts. So there's a lot of money in play from these agencies. We reached out to the agencies to see what the public purpose was. And here's, most of them didn't defend it, but here's what's on the National Endowment of the Arts website. They say that democracy demands wisdom, and they fund excellence. Well, some of the projects being funded at the National Endowment of the Arts, I don't think the American people are going to think that this is wisdom. I think they're going to think it's waste.
And I know that in your report, you found many examples of what was really political wokeness you wrote. What are some of the craziest examples of podcasting content taxpayers paid for and at what cost?
Well, here's an example from the National Endowment of the Arts. It was $225,000 that funded a program in children's schools, a podcast. And this podcast wasn't on the little engine that could. This was a podcast episode on the little pronoun that could. You had $400,000 funded by the Ag Department, for example, regeneration farming, and an episode was on queering the farmer community. You had $500,000, again, Brains on the Move, National Science Foundation, on a podcast for children during the pandemic, starring superheroes battling the coronavirus like Sergeant Socially Distanced, the Masked Mentor, and the Vaccinator. Jan, some of those things actually, folks feel they cause harm to children. Then you got things that went kind of dark. $200,000 of taxpayer money funded a podcast where the originators of the podcast believe that Satanists, those that worship the devil, they play an important role in American political and religious life.
I'd be curious to hear what some lawmakers say about your investigation after they hear about this. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to any of them yet, Adam, but I look forward to seeing more updates on this in the future. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.